2020 started off as a normal year, but just within a few months, it became that year that we're not going to ever soon forget. And it became just this event that was burned into our brain. Because what the pandemic did, first and foremost, it jeopardized our health. It overturned our daily routines. It threatened our lives. It took our loved ones. It filled those days with uncertainty. It filled those days with discomfort for 1,000 different reasons. All right, those days, they just brought chaos and fear and anger and you name it. It was going on. On top of that, during that summer, as if we didn't need anything else going on, there were all of those events that really just brought out this cry for justice, that really shocked the nation, led to social unrest, but then led to this desperate cry for justice. And then, as if we didn't need enough, I don't know if you remember 2020, there was this election that really unified the country, just brought us together. So it drove a deep wedge through our country, and not just through the country, but it drove a deep wedge through families, through siblings, through mothers and daughters, fathers and sons. It was something that really just ripped us apart. Okay, what these events did, what these real and tangible and concrete events did, they revealed something to us. They revealed something that we typically tend to, because how do we usually think as Americans, 21st century Americans? We wouldn't say this out loud because it sounds kind of, arrogant. But as 21st century Americans, the way we think is, we've pretty much got everything figured out. We're in control, and I'm going to be a good person, and you're going to be a good person, and we're going to be perfectly happy because we got everything under control. So what 2020 did is it revealed to us that that's not true. It revealed how we're not as in control as we think we are. We are not, as we don't have everything figured out as much as we think that we do. They revealed just how complicated and intricate and delicately balanced everything is. The world, society, relationships, you name it, just everything. Okay, and that year, pretty much overnight, we discovered just that truth. And it all fell apart, and it was just chaotic and a mess. And we suffered. We really, really suffered that year. What 2020 did, again, was it made very real and very concrete what our faith then has tried to point out to us for about 8,000 years. Right? Again, we tell ourselves we're in control. We make the world. We're the ones that make this world keep spinning round and round. That's us. We're doing it. But what 2020 did is it said, no, actually you didn't make the world, and you're not in control, and you don't make the world go round. And what our faith has been trying to teach us for the Judeo-Christian religion for 8,000 years, among other things, it's been trying to point out to us a simple fact, which is, we're not God. We're not. Sorry. Did that burst your bubble today? You're not God. I'm not God. So a beautiful thing, though, that happened then is in this sort of last-ditch effort, many people during that year, they began to cry out to God. But they cried out with the words of something along the lines of, don't you care? Don't you care that we're being destroyed? Don't you care that all of this is happening? Don't you care that everything is falling apart? Okay, the same thing that the disciples asked Jesus in the boat today, as their lives are being threatened, as they're having this event in their life that's causing them to lose control, and again, everything's falling apart for them. They asked Jesus, don't you care that we are perishing? Don't you care that we're being destroyed? And how does Jesus respond? I do care. I'm so sorry. That was my bad. Let me fix things for you. I'm sorry. I told you it was all going to be okay. I told you everything was always going to be fine. Sorry. My bad. No, Jesus says, why are you afraid? Do you not yet have faith? It's a strange response, but Jesus says, why? Why? What's going on here? Jesus' response was if you believe what you say you believe, why is everything falling apart for your life? Why are you scared? Don't you have faith? Again, imagine if 2020 happened again today. Pray God it doesn't. But imagine 2020 happened again today, and all of a sudden, same thing. Work was threatened, school was threatened, sports were threatened, everything just began to fall apart. How are you going to respond? Okay, are you going to be without fear? And even though things are going to be challenging and tough, are we going to trust God and say, but God's ultimately in charge? And yeah, there may be suffering, and yeah, things may get difficult, but we trust that God's still in charge of everything. Or are we just going to totally freak out again, and everything's going to go to the Is that what's going to happen? Okay, what our readings are getting at is this question. What Jesus is getting at is this question. And this event on the sea, and this event that happens there on the sea, what the disciples do is they betray what they actually believe. They betray what they truly believe. When the storms comes along and this real, tangible, concrete event in their life, their true beliefs are revealed. And their belief is, well, they don't actually believe in Jesus. They say they do. They hang out with him a lot. But they don't actually trust him. They don't actually have faith in him. Okay, that's what this passage is really getting at. It's easy for us to focus in on the miracle and to say like, oh, look at this. Jesus calmed the seas. He can do whatever he wants. He's God. But what this passage is really getting at is trying to point us in on that fundamental principle, which is, no, you can trust Jesus. You should trust him. Everything in your life should be given to him. Our lives, the fear that we often experience, it shouldn't be there. Why? If we truly trust him, that's what's going on. And the reason that we know this is because of the first reading that the church pairs this gospel with. Our first reading is taken from the book of Job. Beautiful book. Job is a beautiful, beautiful book. But Job is a parable. It's not like this historical account. Job's like a good novel. It's like East of Eden by John Steinbeck, right? It's just a good story. But within that really good story, it's dealing with really big questions. It's dealing with fundamental truths of human life and human experience. That's what Job is doing. We all know the story. Some of you may not. Most of you do. The story of Job, it's all about Job. Good job. Okay. Job is about Job. Job is this guy that's upright and righteous. He fears the Lord, right? He walks in his ways, as the scripture there says. We're also told then that Job is like super wealthy, and he has 10 kids, a good number of kids to have. Then he also has a huge farm, tons of animals. So Job, what the story does is initially it just paints Job as this great guy. And he's not like this stuck-up rich guy. He's a very generous man. He's exactly everything you would ever want. So he's painted as this perfect guy. Great. What then happens, chapter 2, is Satan comes along and Satan asks God. He talks to God. He's like, hey, look at this. That Job guy, yeah, I know he's great. He's always doing what you want him to do. He's just a really generous, loving man. Great, great, great. But if everyone was blessed as he was, if everyone was as rich as he was, yeah, they'd all be great people. It's just, you just blessed him so much. That's why he's such a good guy. You cheated. So God says, go test him. And so God allows Satan to do whatever, again, it's not a real story, it's a parable. But God allows the Satan to do whatever he wants to do to Job. So Job goes down to earth, wipes out his children. All of his children are killed. He then wipes out his farm, wipes out his wealth, and Job is left just destitute and ends up with a skin disease that's just a real pain in the butt. Okay, so that's chapter 2. The next 35 chapters are where Job and his friends are just in dialogue. And this dialogue is dealing with the fundamental question that the book of Job is trying to deal with, which is the question of human suffering. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen to anyone? What's going on here? What's this all about? Towards the end then of the book, Job gets really fed up, and Job just cries out to God, and he's just like the disciples did in the gospel. God, don't you care? What in the world? Why does all of this happen? Aren't you going to do something? Do you not care that we are perishing? And so that's when our first reading picks up to, it just expects you to know all these things. When we just hear, here we go. So our first reading from the book of Job picks up right there. And this storm comes along, and God speaks to Job through the storm. And what God tells Job is not a lot. He just all of a sudden for several chapters takes Job on this whirlwind tour of the universe. He just shows Job, here's the world. Here are the seas. Here are all these animals. Let's go look at the stars. Let's go look at the planets. And God just continues to ask Job, did you make these? Job, are you the one that keeps the world spinning? If I were to put you in charge of the universe for a day, do you think you could handle it? You can barely handle your own life, Job. You think you could handle all of this? Again, this is what God begins to do with Job. But why? Why does God do that? Because God's not answering Job's question. Job's question is, why is there suffering? Why do you allow this to happen? And God just starts telling him about how big and awesome creation is. What God's doing is he's addressing a fundamental and a much deeper assumption that Job has. Okay, and the assumption that Job is making is this. Job thinks that he has enough wisdom to tell God how God ought to be running things, which we've never done. So that's not us, of course not. Job thinks that he has enough wisdom to tell God how God should be running the world. So by showing him the complexity of the universe, what God is saying to Job is that Job's perspective, just because he's a human, is very limited. And what may look like divine injustice from Job's perspective, well, God says, you don't have this infinitely bigger perspective that I have. And then God just kind of leaves it at that. He never really answers the question of human suffering. Really, at the end, God just essentially says, look, the world is a big and awesome and wonderful place, but it wasn't necessarily created to prevent suffering. And so what God asks from Job and what he asks from each one of us is trust. A trust in his character, trust that he is just, that he is loving. He asks for faith. And that's kind of it. Okay, in the midst of the storm on the sea, which is also an image of all that stuff that we go through in our lives, in the midst of those challenges that we face in our lives, what does Jesus do? Jesus never promises to come and just kind of fix all of our problems. In the midst of all that, when we cry out to the Lord, hey, don't you care? What is Jesus going to ask us? He's going to say, why are you afraid? You stand up every Sunday and say, I believe in one God. I believe in Jesus. I believe in the Holy Spirit. So why are you afraid? Do you not yet have faith? And I get it. Again, many people feel betrayed by this passage because the easy objection, I'll make it for you. But Father, Jesus did fix the disciples' problem there on the sea. That was pretty nice. But when I prayed for my mom, and I prayed and prayed and prayed, she still died. And when I lost my job and I prayed and prayed and prayed for a new one, I didn't get one. What the heck? Right, so we can still feel very betrayed. But what is Jesus trying to do with this passage? Is Jesus trying to reveal to us that he'll fix all of our little problems? He's trying to ask us, will we continue to place our faith in him in the midst of our problems, in the midst of the struggles that we are bound to go through during our life? Are we still willing to place our faith in him, to trust him even in those moments? Okay, 2020 passed, thank God, but that's not the problem, so that's not the crisis we're facing right now. So what is? Maybe there's not any huge crises going on. You can just think of your own life, what you got going on. Usually the crisis, the event of our life is just our daily life. It's just the daily grind. It's family life, it's marriage life, it's kids, it's jobs. That's the stuff, right? Those are the that's the crisis of life. But no matter what the crisis is, okay, the temptation that we are always going to face, whether it was 2020, whether it's 2024, the temptation we're always going to face is going to be to take the bull by the horns and to just do it ourselves. That's the universal temptation, whether it's 2020 or 2024. That's always going to be the case. Again, go back to just about every sin we commit. It's going to come back to that, is that we think we're wiser than God. Things aren't going according to the way we think things should go. And so we take the bull by the horns and then go do our own thing. And if that's the case, what are we doing? Even though we may still come to church every single Sunday and our butt may still be in the pew, the question is, but do you have faith? Do you have enough faith to say, even in the midst of those challenges and crises, I'm still going to operate according to God's wisdom and not my own wisdom? Because again, it's very easy just to stop trusting him, to stop placing our faith in him, to stop thinking that his wisdom is wiser than ours. There's a lot of examples of the ways that this can shake out. A classic one, especially when it comes to the Catholic Church, we get crucified just about every 2 minutes for our teaching on marriage and family life and human sexuality. Man, do we get crucified for that one. But this is exactly and precisely what happens with that. If a couple is struggling to have children, well, all of a sudden we're wiser than God, and we go with in vitro fertilization. If all of a sudden we don't want kids, we go right to contraception, get a vasectomy, whatever it may be. If all of a sudden a kid shows up that we don't want, we just go get an abortion. The wisdom of God would say, well, if you're struggling to have children, there's a lot of ways that the church teaches to help with that, but also there's adoption. If you don't need to have a kid at this time for responsible reasons, there's this thing called natural family planning. If there's a kid that comes into your life that you don't want or that you can't take care of, there's this thing called adoption. Right? That's the plan. That's the wisdom of God. But what do we do so often is we say, yeah, but I'm wiser than God. And God's plan sounds kind of dumb. So I'm going to go do my own thing. And we fear what the plan of God and the wisdom of God where it may lead us. And so we take the bull by the horns and go do our own thing. Another classic example, I've talked about this one a lot, but one more time won't hurt, is our busyness. Right? Back in 2020, there was this fear that just permeated everything and drove everything. In 2024, the cool kids had to teach me this. I didn't know. That's how old I am now. Like, I didn't know the cool things the kids were saying. The kids said, it's FOMO, Father. And I was like, what? FOMO, for us old folks, FOMO is fear of missing out. It's an acronym for fear of missing out. Okay, what we do is we fear missing anything, and so we try to do everything. Right? We think that because that thing may finally make us happy, that thing may finally be what fulfills us. So we always try to do more and more and more and more. And we think that if I just do everything, that will fulfill me and that will make me happy. Or if we're not doing that, we often do that with our kids. If my kids go to every event, if my kids play every single sport, if my kids are always doing something, then they're going to be happy. If I give them everything, take everything out of their life that could ever cause them any suffering, then they're going to be perfectly happy. And the survey says, no. The survey says happiness continues to plummet for kids, anxiety continues to skyrocket for kids, and mental health continues to plummet for kids as well. Right? And then all the parents are just drowning in busyness. So in the midst of it, even then on top of that, what's the first thing to always go? God. The first thing we ditch in the busyness is God. But also then the first person we blame when anything goes wrong is God. And just like the disciples, just like Job, we begin to cry out to God in those moments, don't you care? Don't you care that my life is falling apart? Don't you care that things are so busy it's drowning me, God? You must not care. See ya. Right, we check out of our faith. So what's the solution then in this case? What's the wisdom of God here? The wisdom of God is to take a nap. I don't know if you paid attention to the gospel today. Where was Jesus during the storm? Taking a snooze. That's probably why Jesus was so upset when they woke him up. It's because they woke him up from a nap. That's the worst. But Jesus is there, asleep. Or what Jesus is showing us is maybe not literally we need to take a nap. Maybe we do. But literally we need to rest. Rest is a great sign and it's a great act of trust. It's saying that I can't do everything, so I'm just going to rest. This is a great act of trust, a great act of faith. When we begin to ask those questions of, God, don't you care? Why aren't you doing so? God's going to ask us, why are you freaking out? Don't you have faith yet? Don't you trust me yet? That's why reclaiming Sundays, fourth Sunday of the month, that's why reclaiming our Sundays is such a concrete and practical way to do this. It's a very concrete way to rest in the Lord. Because Sunday after Sunday, Sunday has also just become another day of the week. We still work on Sunday. We still have sports on Sunday. We still do everything on Sunday. Sunday is just one more day of the week. Instead of it being that one day where we just set it apart and say, I'm going to rest today. Today's for the Lord. We're going to set this one apart. Why don't we do that? Why is that so hard? Yeah, because I have to work. Because I need to go play sports. Because I need to do this. And I know God says to give this day to him, but I can't. Do those people hate God? Nope. But do they trust him? That's the challenge. Again, the challenge is not that people hate God. It's that we stop trusting him. And whether we keep our butt in the pew or not, we can easily begin to lose faith. So what each one of us can do, just simple thing is just to begin to examine our life and to ask, right? What are those places? What are those real, concrete, tangible things that come up in my life where I begin to lose faith in God and I just kind of take life by the horns and do it myself? What are those things in your own life that leads you to do that? Because then we can begin to turn back to the Lord and say, but maybe I should rest on Sunday. Maybe I should begin to trust in his wisdom. Maybe I should follow him. Because when we do that, that's when we begin to experience what the Lord actually promises us, which is that joy, that peace, that happiness that doesn't make sense, but it's there. For those people that place their faith in him, truly place their faith in him.